A rusting ship worth less than scrap can trigger a bill exceeding $1 billion. When the Costa Concordia capsized off Italy in 2012, its removal became history's most expensive maritime salvage, over $1.2 billion, dwarfing the vessel's value. When the Ever Given jammed the Suez Canal in 2021, it froze nearly $10 billion in daily trade. The steel is worthless. The problem is priceless. So why can't owners simply walk away? That question hides a paradox. When you pay to salvage a wreck, you are not buying a ship. You are buying the removal of a hazard. And the price of a hazard has almost nothing to do with the price of the thing that became hazardous. Consider the Concordia in cold numbers. She weighed roughly 114,000 gross tons. In the 2010s, scrap steel sold for $300 to $400 per ton. Do the arithmetic, and the steel inside that hull was worth a few tens of millions at best. Yet her removal cost more than $1.2 billion. Nobody spent $1 billion to recover steel. They spent it to make a catastrophe go away. Remember the scale of what happened that night. The Concordia was carrying 4,229 people when she struck rock off Giglio on the 13th of January, 2012, and 32 of them died. Her captain, Francesco Schettino, was later sentenced in 2015 to 16 years in prison for manslaughter and abandoning ship. The vessel herself was only 5 years old, launched in 2005 at a cost of around $570 million. So the removal bill eventually exceeded twice what it had cost to build her new. That gap between value and cost is not an accident of one unlucky ship. It is the rule. And once you understand why, the next question is whether an owner can simply refuse to pay and abandon the mess to the sea. They cannot. The Nairobi International Convention on the Removal of Wrecks entered force on the 14th of April, 2015, precisely to kill the oldest trick in shipping, walking away. Under Nairobi, the registered owner of a ship is legally responsible for a hazardous wreck, not a shell company you dissolve overnight, the owner on the registry. And that owner must carry insurance or financial security specifically for removal, so the money exists before disaster strikes. You cannot plead poverty after the fact when the law forced you to be solvent in advance. The convention also hands power to the coastal state. If a wreck threatens navigation or the environment, that state can compel its removal. The country whose waters are fouled makes the call, and the owner pays. Abandonment, as a legal strategy, is dead, so the owner is trapped. He must remove the wreck, and he must pay for it. Now the question becomes where the money actually goes. And the first place is not cranes or lifting gear. It is the fuel still trapped inside the hull. Before anyone lifts a single ton of steel, they must deal with what the ship is carrying. The Costa Concordia held around 2,400 tons of fuel when she rolled over. That fuel is the difference between an expensive engineering problem and an ecological catastrophe. To grasp what 2,400 tons can do, remember the Exxon Valdez. In 1989, she spilled about 37,000 tons of oil off Alaska and became a byword for environmental ruin for decades. The Concordia held a fraction of that, but a fraction of a disaster on a Tuscan sanctuary coast is still a disaster nobody would risk. So the fuel comes out first, always. On the Concordia, the defueling was handled by the Dutch firm Smit and its partner Neri, and it began within weeks of the sinking, in February 2012. Divers connected to 17 separate tanks and drew off the heavy oil across roughly 2.5 months, finishing that phase by late March. Only after the last tank was emptied did the far larger and slower job of raising the hull get its budget released. Getting it out is its own dark art. Heavy bunker fuel is not liquid the way petrol is. Cold, it turns thick and stubborn, closer to tar. Salvers use a technique called hot tapping. They drill into the sealed tanks, heat the oil until it flows, and pump it out into barges. It is slow, precise, and it happens in the water, on a wreck that could shift at any moment. That danger points to the second great cost, and it is human. Because before machines can do anything, divers have to go down into the wreck. These are not recreational divers. Commercial divers work at depths beyond 50 meters using saturation diving, living for days under pressure in sealed chambers so their bodies can tolerate the deep. It is one of the most hazardous jobs on Earth, performed in near zero visibility inside a labyrinth of twisted steel that used to be a floating city. On the Concordia, the human effort was staggering. The salvage employed over 500 workers from 26 nations across months, worker rotating after worker, each shift chipping away at a mountain. The operation was led on site by the South African salvage master Nick Sloan, who lived beside the wreck for the better part of 2 years. One of his divers, a 42-year-old Spanish specialist named Israel Franco Moreno, died in February 2014 after cutting his leg on a sheet of metal while working on the sponsons. A reminder that on jobs like this, the risk is never theoretical. The daily payroll alone, once you count the accommodation barges, the hyperbaric chambers, and the round-the-clock support fleet, ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars before a single ton of hull had moved. Their tasks went beyond engineering. Divers recovered bodies from the flooded interior and secured the wreck section by section. This was grim, patient, dangerous labor, and every hour of it cost money. Hundreds of specialists, for months before the ship even moved. Which brings us to the moment it finally did. To lift the Concordia, engineers built systems that cost more than the ship ever had. There was no crane on Earth large enough to hoist 114,000 tons off the seabed, so they invented a solution around her. On the 16th and 17th of September 2013, they righted her by a technique called parbuckling, rotating the entire hull upright in a single, terrifyingly slow operation. It had never been attempted at this scale. The world watched a capsized cruise liner roll upright like a wounded animal getting to its feet. The operation was expected to take around 10 hours. It actually ran for 19, finishing after 4 in the morning on the 17th. Engineers tracked the rotation to the millimeter using a control room packed with sensors, and the hull turned a total of 65 degrees to come vertical. When it was over, the missing 6th body of a victim, an Indian waiter named Russell Rebello, was recovered from the newly exposed decks. The force came from 36 hydraulic strand jacks, machines that pulled the 114,000-ton hull upward inch by inch through cables anchored to the wreck. Get the tension wrong and the hull could tear apart. Every jack had to pull in perfect coordination. And to make her float, salvers welded 30 steel sponsons to her sides. Giant hollow tanks that acted like water wings, providing buoyancy to lift the dead ship. Each was a custom-built structure, fabricated for one wreck, one shape, one job, and would never be used again. That is why the equipment outpriced the vessel. You are not renting standard gear. You are building a machine around a specific corpse. Some of these sponsons stood 11 meters wide and weighed hundreds of tons apiece, and they were manufactured across yards in Italy and Poland, then shipped to Giglio to be bolted on. The largest carried enough displaced water to lift several thousand tons on its own. Fabricating and installing them alone consumed a significant slice of the total bill. The Concordia could, in the end, be floated, but many wrecks cannot. When a ship is broken beyond floating, salvers turn to the most brutal option of all. They cut it apart underwater. Take the MSC Napoli. In 2009, off the coast of Devon, salvers made the deliberate decision to cut her in two. When a hull is cracked and cannot be refloated whole, you dismantle it where it lies. You do not save the ship. You disassemble it. Cutting through a steel hull underwater demands specialized tools. Salvers use diamond wire saws that grind through the structure like cheese wire through a block, and underwater cutting torches that burn even where no air exists. Divers guide these tools by feel in murky water, hour after hour, on metal that groans and settles as it comes apart. Once a section is severed, heavy lift barges lift each piece individually and carry it away. It is demolition in slow motion, in the sea, with human hands. Every cut multiplies the cost, and every lift is a fresh gamble. This is what salvage looks like when there is nothing left to save, only a hazard to erase. And yet all of this can be dwarfed by a single factor, where the wreck lies. Because if it blocks a shipping lane, the cost stops being about the ship at all. It becomes the value of frozen global trade. In March 2021, the Ever Given wedged herself across the Suez Canal and stayed stuck for 6 days. She was not sinking. She was not spilling oil. She was simply in the way. And being in the way, in that place, was almost unimaginably expensive. Roughly 12% of global trade passes through the Suez Canal. When the Ever Given blocked it, she strangled a main artery of the world economy. Around 400 ships piled up on both ends, waiting, burning fuel, their cargo rotting or delayed, contracts breaking, factories starving for parts thousands of miles away. The ship herself was enormous by any measure. 400 meters long, 59 meters wide, and capable of stacking over 20,000 containers. She had run aground on the morning of the 23rd of March during a sandstorm with winds gusting past 40 knots, and she lodged so completely that her bow buried into the eastern bank while her stern kissed the western one, sealing the channel like a cork. Every hour that ship sat sideways, the meter ran on the entire planet. That is why refloating her became a round-the-clock emergency. Nobody cared about the value of the Ever Given. They cared about the trade she was choking. So how do you free a 250,000-ton ship jammed into the banks of a canal? You attack the ground beneath her. Dredgers removed around 30,000 cubic meters of sand and mud from around the bow, digging the canal out from under the wreck to loosen her grip on the earth. At the same time, a fleet of tugboats, including the powerful Alpguard, hauled and pushed against the hull. Steel cables strained, engines roared. But brute force alone was never going to be enough. The salvers needed help from something no engineer controls. They needed the tide. On the 29th of March, 2021, a favorable spring high tide lifted the water level just enough, and with the dredging done and the tugs pulling, the Ever Given finally came free. 6 days of paralysis ended on the timing of the moon. That is salvage, the most advanced engineering on Earth, still bowing to the sea. The Ever Given escaped without an oil spill, but most salvages are not so lucky. Environmental protection is often not a side cost. It is the dominant cost. And when a wreck lies on a fragile coast, budgets detonate. The Concordia came to rest right beside Giglio Island, inside a Tuscan marine sanctuary, some of the most protected water in the Mediterranean. Everything the salvers did had to protect that ecosystem, and protection is not cheap. They went to extraordinary lengths. Salvers built an artificial seabed platform beneath the hull, a false floor of steel and cement to hold the ship steady and stop it grinding into the living seabed. They engineered a foundation for a shipwreck purely to shield the water around it. That platform rested on 6 underwater grout bags and required drilling anchor points into the rock, and around 18,000 tons of cement grout were poured to build it. Marine biologists monitored the surrounding Posidonia seagrass meadows throughout, and a program even transplanted colonies of a protected mollusk, the giant fan mussel, away from the work zone before construction began. That is the tax of a protected place. Marine protected areas impose strict restrictions on noise, on discharge, on what you may disturb and when. You cannot do the fast thing. You must do the clean thing, and clean is slow, and slow is expensive. The sanctuary that made Giglio beautiful is what made saving it cost a fortune. By now, the numbers are dizzying, and someone has to pay them. This is where salvage becomes a legal story, because the cost does not always fall on the shipowner alone. Sometimes it is spread across everyone whose cargo was aboard through an ancient principle called general average. General average is astonishingly old. It dates back to the Rhodian sea law of the ancient Mediterranean, the idea that if goods are sacrificed to save a ship, everyone who benefits shares the loss. If the captain throws cargo overboard to survive a storm, every merchant pays a share, not just the one whose goods went into the water. Shared peril, shared cost. That ancient rule reached out and touched the modern Ever Given. Her cargo was held while the owner, Shuei Kaisen, declared general average. Suddenly, thousands of businesses whose containers sat on that ship were told they were financially liable for the rescue, whether their goods were touched or not. And the leverage is brutal. Owners must post bonds before their cargo is released. If you want your containers back, you pay your share first. Some cargo sat stranded for months while owners argued and paid. A rule written for ancient wooden galleys still decides who pays for a modern steel giant. The law is as much a part of salvage as the crane. Now step back and add it all together. The fuel, the divers, the sponsons, the cutting, the tides, the sanctuaries, the lawyers. The true accounting reveals what salvage really is: a race against collapse, pollution, and liability, and never a hunt for treasure. The Concordia's wreck removal project ran roughly 2.5 years of continuous, dangerous, specialized work on a single dead ship. Final costs reportedly climbed toward $1.5 billion once every phase was counted. The fuel, the platform, the parbuckling, the towing, all of it. And what was the reward? In July 2014, the hull was finally towed to Genoa for scrapping. After $1.5 billion, the prize was the right to haul the corpse away and take it apart. Nobody got rich. Somebody stopped a disaster. That is the entire point. Once a wreck is refloated or cut apart, its final journey is to a breaker's yard. And here, the economics reach their bitter punchline because the steel that cost a fortune to recover returns almost nothing. Scrapping the Concordia in Genoa dragged on until 2017. Years more work, dismantling what had been so painstakingly raised. Yes, the recovered steel is recycled, melted down, and reborn as new metal. But it recovers only a tiny fraction of the removal cost, pennies against every dollar spent lifting her. That grim math is why the world's shipbreaking is concentrated in yards in India, Bangladesh, and Turkey, where the labor is cheapest and the margins on old steel barely exist. The scrap value was never going to fund the rescue. The steel is, and always was, the least important thing in the whole story. So if salvage does not pay for itself, who funds it, and why does it happen at all? The answer is that salvers are hired to protect the public interest, backed by insurers and compelled by law. This is a system designed to make dangerous, unprofitable rescues happen anyway. The financial backbone is insurance. Protection and indemnity clubs provide the liability insurance that stands behind wreck removal. When a shipowner cannot cover $1 billion bill, these mutual insurers do. It is the money that Nairobi legally requires to exist before the ship ever sails. And the salvage itself often runs on a remarkable contract called the Lloyd's Open Form. No cure, no pay. The salver gets nothing unless they succeed. It is a savage incentive that rewards results and punishes failure, aligning the rescuer's fortune with the wreck's actual removal. But no cure, no pay had a dangerous flaw. If a salver could not save the ship but could still prevent an oil spill, the old rule paid them nothing for saving the coastline. So the industry added SCOPIC clauses, which reward salvers for environmental protection even when the ship itself is lost. Now, protecting the sea pays whether or not the steel survives. The whole legal machine is bent toward one goal, stopping the harm. And so the wreck vanishes. Lifted, cut, towed, melted. The ship that dominated headlines becomes a memory, and then nothing at all. But the lesson it leaves behind is permanent, written into law and into the sea itself. The Nairobi Convention closed the loophole of abandonment for good. No owner can gaze at a ruined hull, calculate that walking away is cheaper, and vanish. The wreck follows the owner home. The responsibility does not sink with the ship. This is why modern salvage is measured in liability avoided, not value recovered. The success of a salvage is not the money it earns. It is the catastrophe it prevents. The coastline unspoiled, the shipping lane reopened, the disaster that never made the news because someone paid to stop it. And it explains the strangest truth of all, the one that opened this story. The most expensive ships to remove are often the least valuable. A rusting hull with worthless steel, wedged in the wrong place, leaking the wrong fluid, can cost a fortune, while a pristine ship in open water costs nothing to leave. Value never mattered. Only danger did. He, hazard, ts, more than he hull. The sea sets the price, not the shipyard, and the bill is written in pollution prevented and trade set free. The steel is worthless. The problem is priceless. And no owner, ever again, can simply walk away. If this look beneath the waterline was worth your time, consider subscribing so the next lore film finds its way to you.